Hello, my name is Elliot Moore. I am the music director and conductor of the Longmont Symphony Orchestra. Also, I'm the founder of the new nonprofit organization, the Music and More Foundation. And it is a pleasure to be speaking to you today about Mahler Symphony No. 5. First, I wanted to just kind of start off with some things about Mahler's background. He was born in 1860 and died in 1911. So he was 51 years old when he passed away. And Mahler really was kind of the bridge between late Romantic composers and the modernism of the 20th century. And as a conductor, actually, he was second to none. He was one of the most world-renowned conductors, certainly of his day. And his music did not have the same sort of success, certainly during his lifetime, as he had as a conductor. In fact, his music was pretty rarely performed, and that was not helped by the fact that actually the Nazis banned the performance of his music. And so it was really after 1945 when Mahler's music became known to a wider audience, and that people really began to fall in love with his music. His output actually was relatively small, despite having written at least really 10 symphonies. And the reason that his output was small was because he was kind of a part-time composer. He was only able to compose when he was in the summer months, when he was taking his breaks from his normal and rigorous conducting performances. Mahler, there were really, I guess, a couple of things about his background. He was born, well, he grew up rather in a town, a little town, which was on the Austrian-Hungarian border called Iglau. And when he was growing up, there were sounds, music that he would hear sort of around. And that music came to find a place much later in his symphonies. And what he heard as a child in the little town of Iglau was street songs. He heard kind of dance music. He heard folk music. And he also especially heard military music. He also heard church music as well. And all of those 4 or 5 different kinds of music really found their way into his musical vocabulary. And one of the things I think that makes it really interesting is that he's able to have sort of profound music, and right next to that, he would have, marching band music. And it's very interesting how he combines the different types of music in his symphonic output. Also, Mahler had 3 different periods to his compositional style, if you will. The first period that he had encompasses his symphonies number 1 through 4. And each of those symphonies relates to songs and singing. The first symphony actually doesn't have any singers in it, but it relates because he uses one of his song cycles that he composed a little bit earlier. And what makes the first 4 symphonies sort of interesting is that because, of course, songs have texts, we are able to find out the meaning of what the symphony is by the text that accompany it. The second period is basically symphonies number 5, 6, and 7, so those kind of trilogy of 3 symphonies. And those symphonies are what is called absolute music, which is to say it doesn't really have a program that goes with it. It's kind of music for music's sake. The third period that Mahler had in his compositional output, which is to say his symphony number 8, 9, 10, and the Song of the Earth, which in German is Das Lied von der Erde, which is basically his 10th symphony. That the third period all deals with kind of the grave. There is a very famous quote that Mahler has. Actually, he was talking to the Finnish composer Jean Sibelius, and they were discussing what makes a symphony great. And Sibelius had one idea, and the famous quote is Mahler, who said that a symphony must be like the world. It must embrace everything. And I think the question is, well, what does Mahler mean by it needs to be like the world and it must embrace everything? I was talking about this a little bit earlier, but when Mahler wants to sort of, write something that pertains to nature, what he's going to do, or maybe one of the things he could do, would be to include bird calls, perhaps in the flute. Or he could actually have cowbells that he would use that would, sort of give a reference to cattle wandering in the Alps of Austria. He often takes it a step further, though, than just putting in cowbells. What he may do would be, because you hear the cows in the distance, he may have the cowbells actually off stage, so that you don't even see them, but you just sort of hear in the distance what that would be like. And he was a master at combining really profound music within something that is much lighter and more banal. So the question really becomes then, what is the world of the Fifth Symphony? What world exists in the Fifth Symphony? And I think in order to discover the world of the Fifth Symphony, we really need to know what was happening at the time when Mahler was composing the work, which is to say in 1901 and 1902. In February of 1901, Mahler had a very, very serious health issue. He actually almost died. He lost a tremendous amount of blood, and he was in hospice. And he had to have, in fact, 2 surgeries to help him recover from this health issue. And because he had this issue, what actually happened was he started thinking a lot about death and dying and the grave. During this period, he composed a song cycle, which is called Kindertotenlieder, which Kinder means children, Toten means death, and Lieder is song. So it's sort of the songs of the deaths of children. Mahler was the second of 14 children, if you can imagine, and only 7 of the children survived infancy. Death was very much on his mind. And when he composed the first movement of the Fifth Symphony, he was thinking about all of this. The first movement is a funeral march. He names it that. And it's interesting in part because he uses a general march from the Austro-Hungarian army. And he quotes that right at the very beginning. And it goes something like this. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. That's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, as I mentioned, it was a march tune that he knew from his childhood. But also it's interesting because short, 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 long, short, 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 long is the same motive, rhythmic motive, that Beethoven used in his Fifth Symphony. Da, 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 short, 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 long, or in the case of Mahler, da, 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 short, 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 long, short, short, long. He connects the first movement, this funeral march, to his second movement, which is stormy and fiery and not exactly pertaining to death, but certainly has a dark tone to it. And this is important because these 2 movements, the first that kind of connects to the second movement, that makes the first of 3 parts of the Fifth Symphony of Mahler. Then he composed the third movement, which is a scherzo, light in nature. And he actually talks about it, that it is about, it has no dark clouds whatsoever. It is full of life. It's somebody living in bright light in the zenith of their life. It is a uplifting movement. Now, what happens next in Mahler's life is very important. So in November of 1901, he was at a gathering, and there was a woman there by the name of Alma Schindler. Now, Alma was not overly keen on meeting Mr. Mahler. For one thing, he was she thought that he was known for some womanizing, and that every female singer in town in Vienna wanted to get to know him because he was the conductor of the Vienna Opera. Another thing that I think was very interesting was that they got into a rather heated argument that evening about a ballet and the music of Zemlinsky, who was a composer of the day. A couple of things are important about that. One is that Alma Schindler was a student of Zemlinsky, and of course they were having an argument about her teacher. But it also happened that they were in a scandalous relationship that probably the world did not know about at the time. And so she was defending, let's just say, her boyfriend. Mahler and Alma did not get along very well that evening. However, I suppose they liked each other enough to decide to meet the next day. And they met the next day and, in fact, hit it off brilliantly. And within, I think, about 5 months, had gotten married. So the relationship with Zemlinsky and Alma ended, of course, and Mahler and Alma got married. All of a sudden, Mahler's entire outlook on life changed. He was not coming back from, a terrible health issue. He had survived all of that. Now he's found love. And so what does he do? He composes the fourth movement of his Fifth Symphony, which is it's really considered to be sort of a love letter in music to his now wife, Alma. He contemplated the idea of maybe ending the symphony there. However, he knew that there needed to be some kind of boisterous finale. And that is when he decided to include the fifth movement, which is exactly that, a boisterous finale. So I kind of want to recap here for just a little bit. We have the first two movements that belong together. Then we have the fourth and fifth movements, which belong together. And in between is kind of this pivot mark, which is the third movement. All of this takes the symphony from sort of a dark tone into a light tone. And that is the arc, really, of the Fifth Symphony. To end our conversation here would be to miss out on all of the juicy details that followed. So I do want to talk about some of the things that followed. I believe I mentioned that Alma was a composition student of her teacher and lover, Zemlinsky. When Alma and Mahler got married, Mahler basically said that there was only room in the family for one composer, and that was going to be him. And so she gave up composition, but she resented Mahler for that. And over the course of years, Mahler, who became music director at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City, and then at the New York Philharmonic, for Alma, these things didn't really matter that much. She still resented her husband for kind of making her give up her composition. She, I think because of the resentment, actually had an affair with another man. Mahler found out about the affair right before the world premiere of his Eighth Symphony. And Mahler, of course, not being happy about it, but deciding maybe he could do something, decided to go to a relatively well-known psychologist by the name of Sigmund Freud. And Freud said, yes, your wife probably really does resent you. And if you could be more supportive, that would probably be quite helpful in your relationship. And Mahler actually took that advice to heart and began really helping Alma with her composition, trying to get her compositions out there much more. However, shortly thereafter, Mahler died. Alma decided after his death that she would marry the man with whom she was having an affair. She then went on to have another affair with another man, married him. And it was in 1938 when Alma decided to move actually to the United States because of the Second World War. And they eventually landed in Los Angeles, where she lived the rest of her life. There is another thing that I want to say about the Fifth Symphony, and it relates to a very interesting tradition that dates back to the time of Mahler and some of Mahler's peers who were conducting the Fifth Symphony. And nobody quite knows how accurate this is, but it has been coming back more and more. The tradition of having the principal horn player in the third movement, it's a very large horn part. Sometimes what happens is the horn player will perform their part from their seat, which they always sit in. And other times the conductor and the horn player will discuss, and what they'll do is they will have the principal horn player actually come to the center of the orchestra, center stage, next to the conductor, and play the part there. And I just wanted to let everyone know that this is something that dates back to the time of Mahler, and yet many performances don't include that. So in the event that you see a horn player stand up after the second movement and come to the center stage, I want everyone to know that this is a tradition that dates back to Mahler's time. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sure you're going to love this phenomenal orchestra playing Mahler's Fifth Symphony. Enjoy, and I hope to see you there.